The entire heavyweight division is in limbo, and one man holds the keys to everything: Oleksandr Usyk. Governing bodies are scrambling, title belts are on the verge of being vacated, and rankings are mysteriously shifting. But why? Because one unexpected decision triggered a chain reaction that changed everything. When Daniel Dubois pulled out of his fight with Joseph Parker, it set off a butterfly effect. The reshuffled title fights forced governing bodies to make moves behind the scenes and left multiple fighters in limbo. Now the future of the heavyweight division depends on what Usyk decides to do next. So who's getting a title shot, who's getting left behind, and who's about to cash in on all the chaos? Let's break it all down as I try to predict what's going to happen in the heavyweight division. Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. Today we are talking heavyweights, people. We're talking about the heavyweight division, the marquee division of boxing as it's usually known. And to be honest, right now we have so much good talent in that heavyweight sort of top 15. There's so many different fights that can be made and so many different permutations depending on who decides to do what. Now, I am going to try and pick through the bones of it in this video because there are so many different factors right now that will decide who's going to fight who. And it's frustrating, and it speaks to the number one issue we have in boxing and the reason why this TKO thing has taken off or is taking off with Dana White in Turkey, which is that there is no clear rhyme or reason to what's going to happen next, other than what all the different governing bodies decide, of which there are too many, because they all have competing interests and they all have competing rankings. You go through the top 10 rankings of any of these governing bodies, and we're going to do that today. We're going to work our way through and figure out what the next matchups are going to be in this division based on all the political and strategic moves that are being made right now. As I said in my intro there, it all started with that recent pullout of Daniel Dubois, and the scene now is rife with conspiracy theories, because when Dubois pulled out of that Parker fight a couple of days before, I thought to myself, there's absolutely no way there's any kind of conspiracy here. This guy has probably got an injury or he's sick or whatever it was, and he's had to pull out, because I just didn't believe that you would ever let it get 2 days before and make a decision that rash and that risky. But with the way things are moving now, with the fact they haven't just gone and made Parker against Dubois, remade the fight, there's a number of reasons that are leading me to believe there's actually potentially credit to that situation. Now, I'd like to think someone wouldn't do that and would behave more professionally, but at the end of the day, we don't really know. And there's so much going on, there's so many moving parts. So before I try and get into this and try and figure out what's going on and what is going to happen, all I ask is that you subscribe to A Guy Called Henry if you're new. If you've been watching me for a while, do hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you haven't done that already, hit a like on this video, and let me know not what you think, let me know what you think will happen, but also what would you like to see happen? Because I think as fans, we don't often get to say what we think. We don't get to dictate anything. So all we can do is come on platforms like mine and have a little bit of a chat and try and figure out what the actual right thing is to do, because there will be an outcome here. And a lot of it's going to be motivated by business. So the question here is, you as fans, what do you want to see? Who do you want to see fight who? That's the question I have for you before I get into this one. Now, what we're going to do in this video, I'm going to do it right now, is I'm going to go on the Boxing Scene website. I'm going to pull up the top 10 heavyweight rankings for each of the governing bodies, the IBF, WBA, WBC, and WBO, and try to work out what's going to happen next. Now, the place to start here, as I mentioned in my little preview at the beginning, is Oleksandr Usyk, because Oleksandr Usyk holds the key to absolutely everything right now. Depending on what he decides to do, depending on what his motivations are, that is going to dictate what everybody else does. And so I think you'll see a massive chain reaction once his next fight is announced. But first, before we do anything, we should try and understand what is Usyk still doing in boxing, because that will help us to figure out what might happen next. And I think with any fighter, any fighter that talks about legacy, there's always a financial component no matter what. Usyk's made really good money in those Tyson Fury fights, and of course his 2 fights against AJ as well. So he's in a very, very strong position now. And he should still be unified. He hasn't lost the IBF belt in the ring. He was stripped of the IBF belt because the IBF are very strict with their mandatories, and I think he had to have the Fury rematch if he was going to have another fight. So there was no opportunity to try and defend that belt. So we have an IBF champion right now, which is Daniel Dubois, and we have Usyk who has the WBA, WBC, and WBO. The question here is, how much does that IBF belt matter to Oleksandr Usyk, particularly given that he never lost it in the ring? Now, the caveat basically here is that he is already undisputed, but he doesn't actually hold all the belts. And so how important is it to Usyk that he holds that IBF belt and that he can say he's 2-time undisputed in the heavyweight division? How important is that to him? Is that what is motivating him right now and driving him forward? Is that a new challenge that he's set for himself? Because I think he is a guy who thrives on the challenge, the master of the challenge. He loves the challenge. He's not worried about anything else. It's just that's what motivates him. That's what keeps him in the gym. So what does a challenge look like for Usyk right now? I don't think it's just having a couple of meaningless fights and making a bit more money. I really believe that for him, he wants to have some kind of carrot being dangled in front of him to go for. And even in terms of opposition, there's not really anybody out there that you would say can challenge him. And even Dubois, who we'll talk about in a minute, has already lost to Usyk, and he was well beaten in that fight. The whole low blow debate, utter nonsense. It was a low blow, and it was rightly ruled that, and it was a good call. So they're trying to build a narrative around that low blow. The only narrative I see being built in that fight is that Dubois has improved a lot. So needless to say, we have to figure out what Usyk's motivations are here. So I think legacy is a big part of this for him. I do think that for him, 2-time undisputed is a massive factor. Of course, he wants to make more money too, but he's got plenty of money now. And I've always felt he was somebody who had a pure heart. Not to sound too emotive, but I do believe that's Usyk. I think he's an honest person. And I think he genuinely thrives on the challenge. So 2-time undisputed's got to be a big factor. So what does 2-time undisputed look like for Usyk? How does he go about achieving that? Now, the first thing that we look at here, and I've gone on AI here, and I've created this table that I'm going to take you guys through, which basically breaks down what happens in each scenario. What are the most likely things that will happen if Usyk does or doesn't vacate his WBO title? So the reason that's even in question is because Usyk has been ordered to fight Joseph Parker. And, we'll talk about Parker in a minute, but I said in an earlier video that I wasn't too interested in that fight. And actually, I've had time to reflect on that opinion, and I actually have changed my mind. And I actually really would like to see Usyk versus Parker now. But before we get into that, let's assume that Usyk vacates that WBO belt because he wants to go and fight Daniel Dubois. Basically, the situation here is if he vacates the WBO, he goes and fights for the IBF, but he loses the WBO. If he decides to keep the WBO, he can't fight for the IBF. So whatever happens in his next fight, he's not going to be fighting for undisputed, it looks like. So then it comes down to other factors, the level of competition, money, and the challenge. So out of the two of these guys, which is it? Which is the one that, Usyk relishes more? Is it Dubois or is it Parker? I think because of the amount of controversy, manufactured controversy around that first Dubois fight with the low blow, I think that Usyk might want to shut a few people up. And I think he might feel that he wants to go in there and really beat Dubois because Dubois, frankly, is on one of the best runs of form of anybody in the heavyweight division right now. Him and Parker, honestly, they're the two guys on the two best runs of form. And so actually, in a weird way, it's actually not in a weird way, in the right way. It's right that these two should be in the running. The weirdness of it comes from the fact they were supposed to fight each other, and that would have separated them. And it's frustrating to me that didn't happen. And I almost feel that, given that Dubois has not been in the ring with anyone and was off a full camp before he got sick, given that Parker's just had a very straightforward fight against Bacole, for me, the most obvious thing to do is make Dubois versus Parker. But neither of them want to risk that, really. I think Parker would take it, but I get the sense now that Dubois doesn't want to take that risk and he just wants to get straight in there with Usyk. But let's work through this. Okay, so let's suppose that Usyk decides that Dubois is the bigger challenge and he's going to vacate his WBO. If he can apply for an special exemption with the WBO, then maybe he can keep it, but let's assume he can't. He's going to fight for the IBF and vacate the WBO. Okay, so if he does that, what happens next? That then means that Parker needs an opponent. So it's a difficult one. So if Usyk vacates WBO, I see 3 different fights potentially for Joseph Parker. Actually, I see four different fights for Parker. We'll go through them. So the first one is against Justice Hooney, who, if we go to the rankings here, I don't know if you consider it weird. I don't know what you consider it, but Hooney is ranked number 1 with the WBO. And I don't quite know what he's done to be ranked above the likes of even a Derek Chisora, who's ranked at 8th, to be ranked above Zhilei Zhang, who I know he's lost, but he's got some big profile wins. I don't think Hooney's done more than Fabio Wardley has. So it's an interesting one. And they've got Italma there at number 2. And the WBO right now, I feel like this is a classic example of a politically strategic top 10 rankings. It's about for them what's going to generate the most interest and the most money. Now, I'll break that down for you, that statement. Number 1 is Hooney, and I think that's because Hooney is Australian. And so you can imagine Parker versus Hooney for the vacant WBO title would be an absolutely massive fight. In Australia and New Zealand, that would be a good. I say absolutely massive. I assume it would be a massive fight. It feels like it would be a massive fight. When you talk about rivalry, there's a few different things you can do. It can be based on. And I did this in my master's degree. We were studying. I think it was like international marketing or something. But there was this really interesting study I came across, and it was talking about the 3 different ways you can generate rivalry. Number 1 is rivalry based on geography, which is what we have here. Rivalry based on ability level, which is what we often have, Usyk Fury, for example. And I believe the third category was rivalry based on personality. So it's interesting how you see that those three different factors are constantly in play in fights that are being made. You can see with Eubank Jr. and Ben right now, nothing to do with ability, a little bit to do with nationality, but more to do with rivalry. It's not really about Britain, it's more about the two personalities and the fathers, obviously, which they all happen to be British, of course, I understand that. But regardless, you understand what I'm saying. So Parker versus Hooney seems like, an interesting fight to me. Parker versus Wardley, I think, is an interesting one as well. Now, Wardley is ranked number 3. And it's interesting that Wardley's ranked below Italma because you have to say that Fabio Wardley's done more at this point. He's had better opposition at this point in his career than Moses Italma's had. So very interesting that Italma is ranked at number 2. And I believe that is to do with Frank Warren's good relationship with the WBO. He's always had that relationship with them. He's always been able to maneuver his fighters, title shots and different title shots within that organization. So I believe he's pulled a few strings there, which is interesting. So to try and get this into perspective and to try and make sense of this and to try and say what I think will happen if this happens. So let's say Usyk vacates the WBO and fights Dubois. I think that Parker's going to fight one of those 3. And the fourth name to throw into the mix is Anthony Joshua, depending on what he decides he wants to do. Joshua is currently ranked 7th with the WBO. So it really just depends on what fight they order for that. There was supposed to be an IBF eliminator between Bakole and Ajagba. But obviously Bakole took that last minute fight against Parker. So as I understand, that fight's still happening, but it's no longer a final eliminator. So I don't know who the final eliminator is anymore right now. But the point is there's so many moving parts here. So to pick out Joseph Parker's next opponent, which I think will be for a WBO vacant title, and he fully deserves that, by the way, Parker, and I'm delighted for him he's going to get that shot. I believe it was the WBO that he won originally, actually. So that's quite sort of poetic, if I'm right in saying that. But I think given the way the rankings have shaped up there, you've got to say that Hooney's the front runner, but then it's between Wardley and Italma, and while Wardley's done more, I'd say he's earned the shot more than Italma has. There's that narrative, that real strong narrative of Italma becoming the youngest ever heavyweight champion. And that could be decisive in whether or not he gets a title shot there. That's an exciting narrative to me. And honestly, by merit, he hasn't achieved it, but I would love to see it from a narrative point of view, from the fact that you're launching a new megastar in boxing if he breaks that Mike Tyson record. And he looks so good at Italma. So I'd absolutely love to see any of those 3 fights for Joseph Parker for a vacant WBO title. That would be fantastic. I've just realized that I started talking about the IBF. I was talking about the WBO then, not the IBF. But we will get to the IBF in a moment. Okay, so that's the sort of rough movements if Usyk decides to fight Dubois and vacate the WBO. Now, if Usyk decides that Parker is the bigger challenge and he decides to not fight for the IBF title right now, then we've got to find an opponent for Daniel Dubois and we've got to figure out what everyone else is doing, basically. So if that happens, if Usyk fights Parker, which I think would be a fantastic fight, and I think it's a good fight. I think it should happen, and it's a big debate. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you want to see Usyk Dubois or Usyk Parker? I think Dubois pulling out that fight and not fighting Parker next has left a bit of a sour taste in the boxing fans' mouths, and I feel that most people now would actually rather Parker got the shot, who are hardcore boxing fans, that is. In terms of the casual audience, I'm not too sure. I think more people probably know Dubois right now, but the runs of form they're on are not crazily dissimilar, and I would probably rather see Parker because it is a fresh opponent. Even though Dubois is on a good run of form, has he really changed that much? Has he changed enough to beat an Usyk? I'm really not sure. Well, let's suppose that happens. So we need a new opponent for Dubois. Now, if we go to the rankings, what is interesting here? What is interesting here is that we look at the IBF rankings, and as I was saying before, I got a little bit confused, start talking about the IBF. Bakole against Ajagba was supposed to be a final eliminator for the IBF. Ajagba's ranked number 3, Bakole is now ranked number 10. But he lost that fight against Parker, so he now no longer has the opportunity to fight for the final eliminator. And again, I think we're seeing some strategic political rankings here. Number 1 isn't rated currently, so they're trying to find a way to find an eliminator. But the current rankings would allow Daniel Dubois to do something quite startling, and that is to fight Derek Chisora for the heavyweight championship of the world. Derek Chisora is on a decent run of form, it has to be said. He has had some good wins in his last few fights. He managed to beat Joe Joyce. He's managed to beat Otto Wallen, and he beat, who was it? Washington, was it that he fought before that? Yeah, Gerald Washington was the one he fought before that. So he's on a pretty decent run of form as heavyweights go right now, Derek Chisora, and he's been saying that he wants something big for his final fight. If you were to do Dubois versus Chisora in London for the heavyweight championship for Chisora's last fight, you guys might not like it, but it does numbers. It does serious numbers. And when you look at the rest of those IBF rankings, the only other fighter that really stands out to me as having a legitimate shot at Dubois is the Joshua rematch, in terms of the economics and in terms of the level of the competitor, the backlog of of what they've done, looking at those rankings. I mean, I think Wardley would be in with a shout also. And potentially you could try and maneuver a shot for a Talma. Again, all the same names are sort of in the mix right now. But I really think that it's going to be Chisora or Joshua next for Dubois if he doesn't fight Usyk. But that depends if Joshua even wants that fight. I really don't know if that's what he wants to do. And it's a difficult one. We don't know what Fury's doing. He's sort of alluded to a comeback. I'm not even going to call it a comeback. Fury isn't retired. We all know he's not retired. So I don't put any credence in Fury sort of teasing this comeback. I mean, when did he retire? A month ago? It's just ridiculous. Anyway, if I go back to my little table here, I think Dubois, Chisora, Dubois, Joshua, and potentially Dubois, Jagba. Although, as I understand it, I think that's a very, very low chance fight of happening. I think the likelihood is minimal there because Jagba hasn't won that final eliminator and he doesn't carry a huge name. So for me, those are the options for Dubois. They're both British fighters and they're both going to be at probably a stadium fight in the UK. Outside of that, the other fights that we can sort of speculate on, let's just have a look at the rankings again. Very interestingly to me anyway, Michael Hunter has popped up in the WBA rankings. Now, we've mentioned Wardley's name a few times, and he's currently number 1 with the WBA, and Kubrat Pulev is currently their regular champion. And there's been talks of Wardley against Pulev. In fact, has it been made? No, it hasn't. I've definitely heard rumors of Wardley against Pulev, which would make sense. He can get himself a belt then. The WBA regular belt's a load of crap as far as I'm concerned. But I think Fabio Wardley against Pulev would be an interesting one. And I like Michael Hunter. I like the fact he's back in the mix. I've wanted to see him for a while, so that's very interesting to me. The WBC, and this is the person we should talk about before the end of this video. He has to come up, is Agit Kabayel. And the only reason I've not spoken about him at all so far in this video is because I believe it's because he owns a version of a heavyweight title with the WBC. He's not ranked by anybody else, which is just how the governing bodies work. But it seems like kind of a stupid decision, to be honest, because the WBC are never going to order that mandatory for Usyk. You know, they have their favorites and they have their fighters that generate them the most money, and they very, very rarely make them fight mandatories. So for Kabayel being the interim WBC champion, actually, if anything for me, is just stifling his opportunities, potentially. And certainly based on the ranking system, which isn't always enforced, but just if we're going on that, then yeah. And also, Kabayel still doesn't have a huge name. I think he's still going to struggle to get the really big names that he wants. But Kabayel needs a big fight next. He really needs a big fight next. And if I could choose anyone for him, if I could choose a fight, he should be fighting Dubois or Parker, really. Whichever one of them doesn't fight Usyk, for me, in terms of the form of the heavyweights and what's happening, I would want to see Kabayel in one of them. But what's realistic for Kabayel, though? I really don't know. It's difficult. I really don't know what Kabayel is going to do next. It's tough. It's hard to say. And then when we look at Anthony Joshua, that's the other big name there. And we're kind of like, is Joshua, what's he doing? It's got to be the Fury fight, really. I think that's what he's holding out for. But if he doesn't fight Fury, it could be any number of people, really. He's kind of got his pick of the bunch. But in terms of something that makes money, would you guys watch Fabio Wardley, Anthony Joshua? Would you guys watch Bakole Joshua in Africa? That was rumored for a bit. Deontay Wilder's nowhere to be seen in the rankings right now, and rightly so. I mean, where is he in the WBC? He's number 12. So he's always somewhere in the WBC rankings. Would you watch him against Wilder still? I don't know. I'd probably watch it, but it's definitely not even 20% of the fight. Not even a 20th, I should say, of the fight it once was. So it's a difficult one. I think that pretty much covers everybody that I've kind of mentioned in this video. But I think that it's got to be Joshua Fury or nothing, really. But honestly, I think based on what I believe to be true about Anthony Joshua, I think he'll really want that Dubois rematch. I know he's not taken it yet, and I know he's been trying to come back and mentally rebuild and all that stuff, but he's such a competitor, Joshua. If he has a straight shot at a world title, I believe he's going to want to do it. I do. I believe Eddie Hearn when he said that AJ wants that. I really do. I think AJ wants to be a champion again. So you guys might heavily disagree with me there, but I've just got this feeling that that's what he wants. And yeah, he wants to fight Fury and make all that money for sure. But if that isn't going to happen, then what does he do? Because I don't think he's quite done yet. The other really random one here is Lawrence Okoli. And I wonder if Okoli Kabayel will happen. Because he's number 1 in the WBC right now. Number 5 in the WBO. So random, the whole Lawrence Okoli popping up thing. I mean, I know he was a champion before at Cruiser, but he's really done nothing at heavyweight so far. So a bit strange that he's been ranked so high. And he's obviously making some good political moves to be in that position, in my opinion. I know he was meant to be fighting Riakporhe. He's just pulled out of that Riakporhe fight with injury. And again, you start looking at these moving parts in the heavyweight division, and you sort of think, what's going on here? You know, we saw Dubois pull out. We've seen pullouts. We've seen strategic moves. What is that a genuine injury for Okoli, or is this a strategic move? If the fight gets rescheduled, you know it was a genuine injury. If it doesn't, then you have to ask the question, just like we've asked of Dubois. Is that a strategic move, and what would he be doing? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's doing, but I mean, if we look at where he is, I wonder if he's going to get a Joseph Parker fight. I guess it's possible, but where is he ranked by the WBO? He is 5. So again, potentially there's something going on there. Guys, it's all very interesting. It's all up in the air right now, and I don't know what's going to happen. So get your comments in the comments section below and let me know. Who do you think is going to fight who next? And what do you want to see, more importantly? Because that is what we're all about here. We want to give the fans a voice. And the only way to do that is to get your comments in below, because there's nowhere else to talk about it. I've tried to pick my way through this. It's been very complicated. There's so many moving parts. But as I said at the start of the video, the absolute key to this is, what does Usyk decide to do? He holds all the keys, and rightly so. He has been the road warrior. He has been the man who will fight anyone, and he now holds all the keys in the division. And I like it, to be honest with you. I think it's great to see, and fair enough. Unfortunately, we're not going to see an undisputed fight next, I don't think, unless the WBO allow it. If the WBO allow it, I guarantee he'll fight Dubois. That's 100% what will happen. But if he's forced to choose, then it becomes a bit more interesting. And personally, I'd like to see him fight Parker in that scenario. Anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please do bang a like on the video. Please do subscribe to a guy called Henry. Get in the comment section below, as I said. And as I always say, on to the next one.